Hey everybody, what is up? We are so excited to be bringing you this series, the post-sermon series, questions with the pastor. We really don't have a title yet because we don't know if this is going to work and if you like it and if you want more. So
these are my favorite experiments.
Let's do an experiment. Let's wing it. And basically what we said is we wanted to hear from you guys. We wanted to take this Sunday sermon experience and, expand it. Go beyond the series. And we wanted to hear from you guys. What were your burning questions? So we thought, what better series to do this than one about money?
Come on.
Generosity.
I love it. I'm here for it.
Possessions.
Like I said, my favorite experiments right here.
What pastor doesn't love being probed and questioned about money?
Not this guy.
Right? Okay, so we just finished up our sermon series on generosity. It was a 4-part series. Russ, you did 3 of them.
I did.
Pastor Julie did 1. So if you missed any of those, you can go back. They're all on our page here. Watch those. Otherwise, this might not make as much sense.
Yeah, you probably should. I'm going to assume that you were here for the
Hopefully.
sermons.
Yeah, you can watch those. So then we asked you what your burning questions were. What questions did you have and follow up to this series and want to hear discussed? Russ, are you a scholar on money?
No.
Or even the Bible?
No.
Okay, but you read it?
I do.
I see him.
We're married, just FYI. Just
I
FYI.
can confirm.
Yeah.
And
I do read
done a lot of
I
study.
just want to say it again. I do read it.
You do. Clarify. You did a lot of study about this topic, and you studied other people who have studied this topic.
Totally.
So we're just going to have a discussion.
Great.
So let's start with a question.
Yeah.
Okay. First one. What if I cannot afford to tithe? Mm-hmm. My situation is tight and I am month to month with my finances. Is there grace? Does God see and care about my situation? Does he still want me to give?
Is there grace? There sure as heck better be.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's always grace. Does God care about my situation? 100% yes. I would even argue one of the reasons why he asks us to financially partner with him is because he cares about us and our situation.
Explain more.
As we talked about in the series, this is a really big deal for God, that we partner with God, with our stuff, with our possessions, with our money. We're told not to test God in the scriptures, but the one area where God says, test me, is in our tithes and our offerings. And I think there is something about our need to protect ourselves, to create our insecurity, that when we part with a portion of what we have, the first 10% of what we have, to join in God's kingdom work, we're leaving ourselves vulnerable. We're leaving ourselves a little undefended. Like there is a sense of like God has to show up, and that gives him an opportunity, because he cares about our situations, to show up. So is there grace? Yes. I mean, the ancient world that said you have to give in order to get God's favor or protection. That's not tithing.
Yeah.
God moves on our behalf. He loves us. We part with the first 10% as response, as gratitude, because God has already provided for us. That's completely different than let me pay my dues so that I can be accepted into this society or accepted into your favor.
Yeah.
That's not God at all. So any legalism that says you need to do this or else God won't do that, that's not the Lord.
Yeah.
Like he's already given us everything. He didn't just give us 10%. He gave us his son. Right? So that's grace. If you're feeling like, man, my situation's tight, what I would point to is a couple things. Number one, the language we have in the New Testament is that of koinonia, that of sharing. We are parts of a whole, which is to say that when God invites us to partner, financially, he invites us to practice koinonia, to recognize that we're part of a larger body. We share our lives. We share our good stuff. We share our resources, what we have. We share our hard stuff. So part of this partnership is us coming together to carry our burdens together. So for some of us, it is that we partner and it's distributed to others. For some of us, we come and we receive. But that still cannot happen unless we are partnering with our full lives. If there's any sense of we're hiding or we're holding off, then there isn't an ability to have true koinonia. But then this is where it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If we are partnering, and I do believe that God has asked all of us to partner our financial lives with what he's doing, well, then we get to come alongside and we get to peek under the hood and we get to look into our lives and we get to help make decisions and order. And so I would say if you're someone asking and you're like, man, I want to, but it feels like a month to month, I'll say we have great pastors on staff. Like, reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Just get a sense of, all right, what are you actually working with in your financial situation? What does financial freedom look like for you?
Yeah.
What is it that makes you feel like you can't partner even anything with what God is doing? Because there might be things underneath the surface that we can tap on a little bit. That is the Holy Spirit saying, if you want true freedom, you should be partnering. You need to take a step of faith in this way, and you'll see me come through. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What if I believe in tithing regularly, but my spouse disagrees with the amount and the regularity? How should we go forward with our different opinions on the subject?
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, we're married.
Tell me, husband.
So who am I in this situation right here? Am I the one who wants to tithe regularly, or am I the one who disagrees?
Well, when it comes to spending, I'm probably the one that's like, yeah.
Yeah. What's my motivation right here? What's my backstory? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. We've done this.
That's a great question. You know, the first thing I would say is when you are, I'm assuming the spouse is a Christian, a follower of Jesus.
Sure.
Okay. So making that assumption, I mean, you guys are one flesh.
Yep.
You guys are bringing your entire lives together, which includes your financial lives. So there needs to be good conversations about value. I remember one of the earliest fights that you and I got into where I learned that you love shoes.
Love them.
Yeah, and they kept showing up. And I'm
Dramatic.
like,
Dramatic.
perhaps. It was my experience. It was my truth. So kept showing up. And I'm like, one day I'm like, babe, do you need all these shoes? And you literally looked, and by our where we put our mail, there was like 4 new books that I had just ordered.
Yeah.
And you're like, babe, do we need all these books? Like, it was brilliant. Like, I don't think a writer could have scripted that. I was like, wow, yes. I mean, you didn't get off the hook for the shoes, but
sure.
Anyway, it's a good point of like recognizing what we value. So it's super important that we come together as a couple and like really have hard conversations about what we value.
Especially when it comes to money, one of the most divisive things in relationships.
Absolutely. We need to be in agreement with these things. I would say bring in a pastor to have this conversation if there's disagreement. But I would say, I mean, I guess I would push and be like, I would want to ask questions of, you know, why is there disagreement on amounts? If one person's feeling like they want to take a step of faith of 10%, what's underneath that? If someone's like, this feels too much, I'm sure there's something underneath that that's very legitimate. Of maybe they feel like they're the ones who keep records of all the finances or the budget.
Right,
of
which
the
can be
house.
often in couples. There's usually, you know, one person that kind of more manages the money, and sometimes one person that's just kind of
buys the shoes.
Buys the shoes, maybe. Or another
Just
example.
kidding, I'm just kidding.
And so, you know, it might be really easy for one partner to say, yes, let's do this generously. Whereas another person, especially too, if they're geared a little bit more towards like, hey, I want to protect our family and keep us safe and not put us in a financial burdening situation.
Right.
That, you know, that could be understood.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would want like to figure out what is it in their situation that makes them feel like they can't take a step of faith in this way. Because I think there's a conversation, a pastoral conversation that needs to happen there. Yeah. So I'd say have those hard conversations, get on the same page. And then I do think the invitation of Jesus to everyone, married couple, single person, doesn't matter, is true sacrificial koinonia. That we are being invited to sacrificially, which means it hurts, part with our stuff.
Yeah.
To part with a percentage of our income as a way of saying thank you to the provider of our lives, the protector of our lives, which is not ourselves, and as a way of demonstrating that God, we are continually entrusting our lives, our marriage, our situation to your hands.
Okay, cool. What if I would prefer to spend my 10% tithe money on godly things, but not give to the church? So for example, blessing people or hosting meals or treating people or donating to a cause I believe in.
Yeah, great question. I would answer it 2 ways. First, the church, I believe, theologically has a unique status in the world. It is unlike any other organization. It is the one place where people are becoming new creations, and is the one place where worship of Jesus Christ happens fully and exclusively, where the sacraments are practiced. That's where baptism happens. That's where the Lord's Supper happens, where true koinonia and fellowship, as we read about in Acts chapter 2, that's where that's happening. And I don't mean like the institutional church, but the body that comes together to do those things, to pray together. That's unique. That is also where God's Spirit, we're told that the church is the body of Christ. So the church is the people who come in agreement in that way. They are the unique embodiment of what the Spirit is doing to bring the kingdom as a sign. We are not the kingdom. We are a sign of the kingdom that's coming to bear. So when we talk about partnering our lives, which includes our financial lives with the Lord, that is the local church. That is that group of people that we are communing with, that we're practicing koinonia with. So there needs to be financial partnership there. So I would say, I would make that case. Now, as it relates with these other things I want to do, treat people, hospitality, buy meals, all of that, those are wonderful. I think the issue that I would say for saying that's my partnership is the common denominator in all those things is that I'm making the decisions of how I want to spend it. So really, I'm still in control of this. True partnership, as we know, true marriage partnership, which is an example of that, is mutual submission. We are learning to mutually surrender to one another, which means there is something larger than just the sum of its parts. I'm not in control. You're not in control. We're surrendering so hopefully that Jesus can be in control.
That's a pretty big statement for a world that by and large would say, I worked for it, I earned it, my money, I choose if I want to be generous in this way or that way.
Well, the statement, Jesus Christ is Lord, is also a pretty big statement. Like what we talk about each Sunday, the statements of truth that the scriptures put up are huge statements, which is why the local church is important. So I would say the tithe, this idea of sacrificial partnership, needs to be in a situation where I'm not in control, full control. I have a voice, I'm part of the body, but I'm not in full control. So those examples of like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, beautiful, you still should, but I would say that doesn't replace the tithe. So the way we've always looked at it in our budget, and I talked about this in one of the sermons, the people of Israel, they were commanded to bring a tithe, right, for the Levites, for what God was doing, but they were also commanded to practice generosity. So what that meant was when you were, every seventh year, as if there were loans that were outstanding, you forgave them. If you were working your fields and you were harvesting the wheat, you were not supposed to be perfectly efficient. You had to be a little haphazard. So some fell on the ground and you couldn't pick it up so that the poor could come pick it up. That was God's way of saying, hey, you're partnering 10% with me, but also you're going to live generously among one another. So we, in our budget, we've always had the first 10% goes to our local church. So we're partnering with what God is doing, where Jesus Christ is lifted up there. And then we also have room in our budget, and we're constantly prayerfully looking for opportunities for the Spirit to say, bless someone here, take care of this here. I'm doing something over there, listen right there. So that's
something you and I have had to practice too, is then even submitting to one another in that. I would say very rarely do we make even those financial decisions together, but always it's like, an opportunity either from a friend or a cause we've heard about or something, especially if it's like a larger amount. I'm not talking about like, money to somebody on the street or buying somebody's coffee or anything like that, but maybe a larger sum where it's like, hey, I really feel like we should give this amount to this person. We bring that to each other. We usually give some time to pray about it before then we make that step together. And, that's always been a really important foundational thing too, not even in our tithe money, but just in our like generous budget, if you will. And over the years, that generosity budget has ebbed and flowed. Our tithe stays the same percentage, but the other one has changed because our means have changed in our situation and how much we're bringing in from different jobs and stuff like that. Okay, great answer that totally segues into the next question. What if I disagree with the way that the church is spending the money?
Yeah, great question.
Because you were just talking about submitting, right, and partnering and not having the control. That kind of goes along with that. Well, what if I don't like?
I mean, the first thing I would say is ask questions.
Yeah.
Like,
Be curious.
Be curious. Be curious. I think there's lots of things that go into being the church that sometimes we're unaware of. Yeah. And they're like with anything, there's some things that can look more glaring, but actually don't have the same amount of value in the back end. And so I would say, one, at least as it relates with Faith Center, come ask questions. Like, come be curious. We have a church council made up of representatives from our church. They are not paid by the church, which is important. So they're not staff members. Yeah. So there's no conflict of interest. And they are representatives who are charged with looking at the monthly finances of our church, helping us approve our annual budget, and helping us steward the resources that God is entrusting us faithfully and wisely. Yep. So we'd love to have your questions. If you still disagree, then I would say, like, that's going to be some prayer, you know? That's some really deep prayer of, is this a matter of disagreement where you can still trust the leadership of your church, that they are discerning what the Lord is speaking and doing as best they can to listen to the Lord and to faithfully follow him? Or is this a matter where, like, the Lord is saying, actually the values that I've put in your heart are different than the values that I'm doing here at this local church, and I'm calling you into a new space, which is totally fine. Like, as someone who also helps plant churches, not every church is the same. Not every church has the same call. Yeah. So I think that's something that it's not like a one size fits all, or there's a right or a wrong. I think there are universal principles that should be present, I think, in all churches. But I think there's different values and philosophies and senses of call to different groups too. Yeah. So I'd say if you still disagree, then discern, is this an area where you can continually submit and trust the leadership and how they're sensing the Lord? Or is this an area where God's saying, get out of here? Not that, but where the Lord's saying, hey, this is a matter of conviction that I've given you. I got something else for you, another local body. Yeah. So, which is beautiful. Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing. Totally. Okay. This is something you said in one of the sermons. Okay. If it is true that the Bible talks about money and possessions 4 times as many times as love or prayer, why does it seem that pastors and churches don't talk about it very much? Maybe like comparatively to the other things? For sure. I mean, well, again, Jesus said you cannot serve God and mammon. Right. And mammon, as we learned, is a pagan god of wealth. Like, I think what he's saying, and scholars would say, is that money is not neutral. Like, money is attached to a principality and power. And therefore, if we're trying to approach, all to say, I think in the Western world, we have so much stuff. We're so rich. Maybe pastors too? Pastors too, 100%. Is that why it's hard for pastors to talk about it? Because maybe this is for all of us, I think we're constantly battling the god of mammon. Yeah. I think we're constantly we are swimming upstream by living a sacrificial life. I love what C.S. Lewis, he goes, when he was asked, how do I know if I'm giving sacrificially? And he goes, you should look at someone at the same income level as you, and if you guys have the same lifestyle, you're probably not living sacrificially. And I do think there's something, like, sacrificial partnership should hurt on some level. It should leave you vulnerable on some level. So I think we don't talk about it as much because maybe it's touching some... People don't want to listen. It's touching some soft spots we don't want to hear. Like, this is a radical reorientation of our hearts. Yeah. And there's something, let's be honest, there's just some things of following Jesus where if I can go like this, la 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 la, and like act like I haven't heard, it's easier. Well, I just wonder if people are hearing upon like the first sermon in our series, like, great, this is what we're talking about for the next 3 weeks, if people are like,
cool, see you in a month.
Totally,
like,
maybe.
I don't want
Maybe.
to.
But here's the other thing, and I would say this, and I think we could speak to this as a married couple. My gosh, the ways we've seen Jesus move when we have taken these painful, scary steps of financial obedience to him and parted with it. Yeah. We wouldn't have those testimonies had we not.
Totally.
We wouldn't have seen God show up the way he did. And for our friends who have done it too. And there's something so liberating to live this way. Like, forgive my language here, but there is something about when you do live sacrificially and generously, it feels like you're like, you're pushing back. It feels like a certain finger.
That's the language part?
Yeah, that's the language part.
Okay.
To a certain finger, to the God of Mammon. Of like, no, you don't rule me. I belong to the God of Israel. Yeah. And he's my provider. So I'm not afraid of you. Because that's what it does when we don't take that step. Like, why don't we take that step of sacrificial generosity? Oftentimes it's fear. Like, God has promised us, he said he's commanded it, and he's promised us if we do this, he will provide, he'll take care. There's fear attached to it. What if I don't have X? What if this isn't provided? There is something so beautiful about taking that step and being like, well, I trust the Lord more than I'm living by my fear.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, we got one more.
Okay.
Just one more.
Yeah.
I want to trust and tithe, but I have never done it before, and I am scared. How should I start?
Wow, that was like a perfect segue from the last one.
I know why I just put it last. So.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, I would say two things. Do you need to talk with someone about your financial situation? Yes. If so, on our giving page, we have like a little line with a email for a pastor for a confidential conversation about your situation with compassion, but with solid principles.
But just to get over the practicals, because a lot of people are like, my finances are a mess. I need help. You know?
We have that. Second thing is we are launching the Tithe Challenge. Oh. I know. So as we talked about in Malachi, that's the one time where God in the Bible says, I want you to test me with your financial lives, with your tithe. Bring the full 10% to me and watch and see if I don't show up on your behalf. So if you're like, I want to tithe, I want to take a step, how do I do this? We're offering an opportunity where if you tithe for 3 months, at the end of those 3 months, if you feel like God did not show up, and I shouldn't even say feel like, if God didn't show up, because I don't want this to be subjective, like if God didn't show up for you, we will give you every dollar back. Let us know, every dollar back, no questions asked, truly. Or if God did show up, and because we've done this enough, we've done it with friends' lives, we've had pastors who've done this in their churches, if God did show up, and I think he will, because that's his character, give us a testimony so that we can share the testimony in confidence to raise the church's faith as well. Yep,
and that's really what we want to hear, is because that's what it's about. We need to share faith. We need to share each other's stories. We need to buoy each other in those seasons where it's like, man, I'm really doubting the goodness, the truth, and to hear my friends who are stepping out in faith and seeing the way that God shows up for them. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. We can do this. So do it for 3 months and then ask for every dollar back if God didn't show up, or give us a testimony. And so you're basically playing with house money. So it's a guarantee that you can't lose, I guess. You can't lose by partnering, taking a step of faith, partnering, trusting the words of God, and seeing them come through. All right. So you answered all the burning questions. Yes. There they are. It wasn't too terrible. No. Not such a hot seat. Well, if you guys liked this, we may do more of these. We may not. Who knows? I think it was fun. It was talk about keeping people on their heels. Delightful little chit chat. Thanks, guys. Thanks for submitting your questions. We're into our next series. Check it out on our YouTube page.